Hello, my name is Jessica Horn and I'm the producer of the Sussex Festival of Ideas. It is my very great pleasure to welcome you to this event, Poetry South East. This event is part of the inaugural Sussex Festival of Ideas, a dynamic and engaging programme of talks, events and activities. The festival is produced by the newly formed School of Media, Arts and Humanities at the University of Sussex. This event is being recorded and will be available to view on our website after the festival. The Q&A panel is closed for this session, but the live transcriptions can be activated via the button in the right-hand corner of your screen. A member of the festival's team might contact attendees for their feedback after this event. If you do not wish to be contacted, I ask that you please email any member of the festival's team, including myself, to opt out of these communications. Email addresses can be found on the Sussex Festival of Ideas website. With the housekeeping out of the way, I would now like to hand over to Jeremy Page, the organiser of today's event. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. So yeah, as Jessica said, I'm Jeremy Page. I'm the editor of Poetry South East 2020. And I'll start by saying a few words about the Poetry South East series, which started life as an annual anthology of poetry from the region back in 1976. So encountering these anthologies was something of an eye-opener for me, as it was through them that I became aware of the range and variety of poetry that was being written in the 2.5 counties. Prior to this, my awareness of contemporary poetry was limited pretty much to the 4 male poets on my O-level English syllabus: John Betjeman, Charles Causley, Ted Hughes, and R.S. Thomas. The 1976 anthology, which looked like this, was edited by Howard Sargent, and the author of the poem that opens this first collection is the now perhaps forgotten Hal Summers. Aside from penning the poem My Old Cat, which was once voted one of Britain's favourite 20th century poems in a BBC poll, Hal Summers was also private secretary to Aneurin Bevan during the passage of the National Health Bill in 1945. So he was a person of some significance, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to mention him today. Hal Summers died in 2005. Subsequent anthologies in the original series were edited by Laurence Lerner, who of course had a long association with the University of Sussex and was a resident of Lewes, John Rice, Patricia Beer, Barry McSweeney, Patrick Dickinson, and Roger Crowley. An exceptionally varied bunch that resulted in some markedly different editorial selections over the years, with the final 1983 anthology edited by Anthony Thwaite. The Frogmore Press revived the anthology with Poetry South East 2000, which I edited and which launched at the Royal Oak in Lewes. And Poetry South East 2010, which I co-edited with Catherine Smith, followed, but its launch was not in 2010, it was actually in 2011, because an unexpected fall of snow meant that nobody could get to the original launch, which was scheduled to be at the Meeting House on the Sussex campus. So that was delayed until 2011. And launching Poetry South East 2020 has also not been without its challenges for entirely different reasons. But it is this volume that we're here to celebrate today, with readings from 6 of the 52 poets in the collection. Poetry South East 2020 is available, can be ordered through your local bookshop, or it can be purchased at Skylark in Lewes if you are local, or at Much Ado in Alfriston, or via the Frogmore Press website, which is frogmorepress.co.uk. So we have 6 readers from the anthology for you this afternoon, all of whom will read their contribution to the anthology and a selection of their other poetry. Our first reader is Stephanie Norgate. Stephanie has published 2 collections of poetry with Blood Axe, Hidden River and The Blue Den, and a third, The Conversation, is forthcoming in September. Her play, The Greatest Gift, won a Radio Times Drama Award. Stephanie and I first met way back in the last century when she was the Centre Director for the Arvin Foundation. So it's a great pleasure to introduce her as our first reader this afternoon. Stephanie, over to you.
Sorry, just unmuting. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, it's been lovely to keep coming across you over the years. And thank you very much for publishing the poem in Poetry South East, which I hope you can see. And this poem is called Night Walk with My Parents. I'm just going to time my reading so I don't annoy everyone by going over. Okay. This poem is called Night Walk with My Parents, and it was partly about imagining my parents when they were young, before they had children, when they were kind of themselves, before family things happen. They were quite hard up and they'd rented a house I grew up in Selborne in a different house, but they rented a house in Selborne that kept flooding. My dad was from Selborne too. And I just imagined this anecdote, but when I was imagining it, I was older than them. So it's partly about age and time and trying to see our parents when they were younger. Night walk with my parents. We wanted to go out, they said, even if it was only up the lane to Coneycroft Hanger, through the stream's flood, which had drowned the front room and left its watermark on plaster. After they jumbled their muddy chairs upstairs to huddle in the bedroom's mess, they set off with the cat following under the midnight moon that sent its white light down between beeches to cast shadows. Then home to the damp walls to dream of the ditches drained of mud. I barely listened, I wasn't there, but lately I follow their floodlit way to the wood. They are brimful of young laughter as they slosh along Gracia Street. Now I'm the elder and can't help shushing when they splash past the cottage's closed eyes, or when they whistle for the cat who jumps across the lake of puddles, then turns back to search for her own face down there in the rippling moon. So that was my first Poetry Southeast poem. Then I'd like to read another one, which is sort of about parents and children, and it's called Miracle. A friend of mine said, I'm sure it only took you 5 minutes to write this. Well, it took about 25 years. I kept going back to it. And it's very, very simple, though, which is why he thought that. It started when my children were young, and then in a way the world, for good or ill, fills in the rest. It's called Miracle, referring partly to the miracle of sleep and other miracles. Miracle. In supermarkets, strapped in a trolley, on the motorway, belted in the back of a car, under the foundered houses, open-mouthed and fed by drips, in a box drilled with holes in the hold of a boat, in fish crates and on cardboard, on pallets and straw, on a bed of needles on the forest floor, in the curve of a rosy scarf tied to a woman's back, in a line of walkers along railway tracks, under a tarpaulin, under mud and sand, a child is sleeping, a child is sleeping. That'll be my new book. All these will be, just to give myself a quick plug. This one's called Lockdown Bluebells, and I wrote it last year during lockdown, the lovely spring that we had. It's nothing to do with Dominic Cummings' visit to Bluebells, but I'd written it before and didn't know about that. But it was a bit about how we share problems of illness with the past, and it created a sort of link with the plague years when they used bluebell sap to stiffen their ruffs. Lockdown Bluebells. Lockdown bluebells flower muskily under oak and hazel in the woodrow by the river. Walkers out for an hour tread the same path, their feet wearing stems into a shine of sap that might have stiffened lace in plague years past. Two deer tread lightly through the blue, leave barely a bruise, only the arc of a delicate leap in the heady air. We take breaths of bluebell, but their scent will not soften our fear of touching the gloss of others here. In these blue hours, we start from one another like deer. Then another lockdown one, sorry, is the great pain of it for me was not seeing my adult children, and we kept in touch through WhatsApp. My son is a drummer in a heavy metal math rock band, and my daughter's a painter, so there's some references to this running through it. Through a glass darkly. Here is a WhatsApp film of deer running, your scene in my hand, in my head. Here is your painting on a studio floor. Here is a sand martin flying into a cliff, replay. Here is your girlfriend in the snow, in a headscarf, in an old Soviet spa, replay. Here you are dressed as Jamiroquai, dancing through a hallway in Peckham Rye, replay several times, sigh. Here are your paints, here are your plants. Here is a crown of cauliflower cooked in coconut cream. Here you are with your hair dyed pink. Here are your octopus arms playing the drums. Here you are pulling a face on the band's merch, fierce Viking of our ancestry. Here is a mole digging out our car with shovel nose and tiny hands. And here I am herding the mole away. Here is a snail, vision blurred and monochrome grief. For indistinct fluorescent banded sight, my tear-blurred eyes see through the pinprick gazes of a clam. But to reprise, here is a film of your legs in a garden pond seen through your eyes. Here is the sound of a thrush singing the streets of South London. Here are ransoms blowing in a wood. You didn't learn the words we used to learn and their strange poetry. In these days of social distance, I must admit that knowing how to use WhatsApp is a greater emotional hit. But missing you, the actual you, the both of you, I want to quote old words from a lost faith. Now we see through a glass darkly, then face to face. At each electric bleep, this is my paraphrase prayer, now darkly, soon face to face. Some of the poems in my new book are in memory of a good friend of mine, Helen Dunmore. And this is a very short poem about Helen. She was always very smartly dressed and extremely beautiful and stylish. And in a way, I think that was a kind of privacy that hid her wild imagination and immensely unconventional kind of mind and thinking. And I just saw her off at a station in Cornwall once, and there was something about the lining of her coat that seemed to suggest that inner side of Helen. At St. Earth. That time we waited with you at the station. You were as soigné as ever, wearing a black velvet coat that you'd had relined. As women love to do, we talked about the lining, its shininess, the long splash of red flowers, a hint of wildness inside, startling the conventions of the plain, smart coat. And then finally, because I think how's my time going? Oh yes, I've just got time for one more. This is another lockdown one. I was thinking about soap, washing our hands, and how soap is so kind of intimate, and yet we lost intimacy during the lockdowns. So I thought I'd sing a sort of epic poem in praise of soap, and also not in praise of soap. To sing of soap in desperate times. In spite of palm plantations, felled rainforests and effluents, in spite of plastic dispensers, in spite of nitroglycerine, in spite of a name that categorizes lifelong dramas, to sing of soap is to sing aldali, wood ash that lends its name to alkali, to sing rainwater and to sing oils, olive, vegetables, sesame, and not to mourn an absence of tallow, for who wants to rub the fat of a cow on their skin? To sing some soap names, but not others, to sing pears, dove, and lifebuoy, but not imperial leather, a name saddled with empire, whose legacy refuses to be washed down the plug hole. To sing of the soap my daughter gave me, nettle and seaweed, astringent shore, field margins, seawater, kelp, ribbon of nori. To sing soap is to sing my grandmother, lathering a slip of palm olive for skin and laundry, and then to sing the green, unrinsed forgetfulness streaking her long white hair. To sing my sister's gift of a bar of soap is to sing a fourth dimension containing the bloom of 2 lavender bushes. To sing soap is to sing a child sifting pink stars through fingers in a bucket of water and soapwort at the Living Museum. To sing soap was to choose on days when the French market still came to town, from les savons de Marseille, fenouil, citron, or les muguets des bois. To sing soap is to sing happy birthday twice, congratulating yourself like a prime minister, or to watch Gloria Gaynor washing her hands, singing, I will survive for 20 glorious seconds of being alive. And that's me done, actually.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It felt a real privilege to have a foretaste of your new collection, which is coming out in September, right?
Yes, that's right.
Look forward to it. Yep, the conversation. Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
Okay, our next reader is Caroline Clark. Caroline grew up in Lewes, but subsequently lived in Moscow and Montreal before returning to Sussex in 2013. She studied for an MA in European Literature at the University of Sussex, and she is the author of Saying Yes in Russian, which was published by Agenda Editions. Her new collection, Sovietica, will be published by CB Editions in November. Over to you, Caroline.
Hello. Hello, it's really nice to be with you. From my childhood bedroom where I've escaped to find some peace and quiet. I just hope it doesn't all collapse in on me like that scene in Labyrinth. I do want to say thank you to Poetry South East, the Frogmore Press, and the Festival of Ideas for inviting me to read today. I hope that all of the departments gathered into the new School of Media, Arts and Humanities stay safe there. I'll start with the poem that's in the anthology. It's called Itinerary, and I wrote it when I was still living in Montreal, getting ready for a big homecoming. Itinerary. It will read, nowhere, woods, desert, city, house. From here you'll collect furniture, pieces of crockery, an ivy-covered stair. Research yourself well before and after. Look in other people's houses. It's not change, of course, just the chance of it. While there, be silent or speak. What you come away with is what stays. You may remember details, memories, we say. This is self, an exchange of letters, handwritings recognizable, something stayed throughout. No one will ask anything of you. You will ask the most. Your protest. This is a protest. Now I'd like to read a few from that first collection that Jeremy mentioned, Saying Yes in Russian. Tale. And then I came to a place where the tower blocks stop and do not give way to woods or open field. They end in the edge of their ending. They stop. I had set off like many before in autumn. Underfoot, a mishmash of leaves. First came potholes, things to avoid, obscenities. Or was it gestures, a tugging at comprehension? First came the word. They took me to a village wedding. The name of the place meant apple. Yabloko, yabloko. Give me a word I can understand. Say it with a bite. Apples, Russian apples, the year's late harvest remembered. Buy a bucket of my finest, ever so sour the best, and here's a sprig of flowering dill just for you. Here is only memory, giving up its silence. Later, alone, come crunching through snow, come in from the cold with frost on your clothes, smelling of yellowing apples. These words are not my own. A is for apple, Ya is for yabloko. The jaw, the cheek, where both can meet. Difference, a place between tongue and teeth. Say it with a bite. Say it until you get it right. I now read the title poem, Saying Yes in Russian. Place the tip of your tongue against the roof of your mouth, pressing the point, just behind your teeth. Push up, jaw tough, eyes hard, make as if to say no, niet, or think of the negative n of never, at least not yet. In this position and state of mind, swiftly release the tongue forward and down. You must surprise it, yourself, and the one who asked. Then turn that heavy knock of a n into the delicate etiquette of da. This is called The Myth of the Nightingale, which should be singing loudly on Red Square right now. Arrow shadowed, I wait at the city's core, earthbound in dust. First murmurs an underground stream, gurgling audible waterways, sound becoming beaded globes propelled through narrow canals. When away is all I know, now break these amber-sounded notes. All of me is burgeoning to burst these boulders, pebbles and stones, and overflow, flower into the curbside world. All that you hear is real. May you be blessed in strangeness, loved in newness. I'll shake you loose a summer storm against the background roar. Through jasmine and lime, I'll sing you to my source. Let there be flowers in the sand, lilacs in the streets. I can make more life than the sun. The next one is a poem I've never read out before. It's short, it's called Sea Shanty, and it's written in praise of my favorite grammatical case in the Russian language, the dative case. This is the case of direction, moving towards. Oh, life in the dative case is the only one for me, tacking against a headwind, sailing out to sea. Keep your nominative perfection set on distant shores, no completion or arrival, may I always be headed towards. Oh, life in the dative case is the only one for me, sculpted by direction, that's the only way to be. And finally, I'll read a very short one that very clearly paves the way for my second collection that is coming out later this year. It's called At Play. I was Stalin, he was Beria, Pasha was Mandelstam. Well, Tovarish Stalin, repress him, Tovarish Beria, and Ilya bashed Pasha over the head with a book. Now I'm going to read a few that have been written since I've been back in England, and they might be put in a collection that might be called Homecoming. The first is Odysseus is Gone, and it has the epigraph. And slendering to his burning rim, into the and slendering to his burning rim, into the flat blue mist the sun drops out, and all our day is done. I see it happening late. Your face becomes elsewhere, slendering like that sun. You're sinking, sunken, gone, ocean heavy to your bed, and we, the shadowing land, are soon bereft of you. On days like these, we don't get to wave goodbye. Your sudden night has come, and we must let you lie till tides turn home again. I'll say my simple things, send metaphors to the wind, while distant harbour lights twinkle in the bay. Can you be the one to stay? When sand is washed away, water will rush to fill its place. Am I needed more than you? Or give me purest sight. The past is unassailable, your chimera so ancient. The horizon pities no one. Stay on these local seas, shimmer white, sail tonight. The second from this group of poems is called Dawn Chorus. I'd like to wake up with my eyes not feeling red and tired. Never stop living until you have died. The neighbour's bonfire smokes out the garden. I'd like to shower before I go downstairs. There is no run over to explanation or conclusion. The mind starts working, sweet pea flowers. Say you have 8 years left. Don't scrimp and save. I am being liberated by unknown forces. Each stop is a loss. A single hair squeaks between finger and thumb. This one is called Mothers. Upon their gaze, hooked or soothing as a late curl of honeysuckle. Upon their touch, rough or suddenly gentle, they'll wait for you yet. Upon their smell, chemically yours, now breathe a little, deeper, hold it, good. Upon their hearing all tones you issue, pain, lies, ear-splitting lullaby. Upon their need, violent, discreet, first to rear its head, first to be fed. I'll now read three short ones from the collection that's coming out with CB Editions this November. I'm very excited about it. It's called Sovietica. To make the book, I recorded my husband, who's Russian, talking in Russian about his childhood and teenage years in the Soviet Union. I then translated what he said and formed these poems. The book also has images of colour slides that he took one day in 1989 with a group of friends, and some black and white photos that a friend of his took of them messing around, jumping on desks in a classroom. And you can see an image of one of these colour slides on Tentacular website. News. On the night Yeltsin came to power, we were all watching TV and the newsreader said, "Good night, everybody, be free." It was as if we had been given our freedom. Lassie. I first watched Lassie when I was very small. It was just about a dog, so they showed it. But we saw America, how beautiful it was. For some reason, they let us see everything we didn't have. Americans. Firma was what we called foreigners. We'd call out, "The firma are here," or "Look, they've brought the firma." A man was firmach and a woman firmachka. Their things always had a special smell, and when they walked past, or when we opened a new t-shirt we'd just exchanged, we'd say it smells of firma. Most fragrant of all were Americans. I'd now like to read the last section from a longer sequence called Slow River. This river is the River Ouse that goes out to the sea here at New Haven. And you can see a short film with the whole poem that is now on the Molly Bloom Poetry magazine site. Slow River. To Foe, to Caburn, to the shapes that you know in the land, to the contours that remain since the Roman sea receded, to Rodmell, to southeast and north, to the river as it moves through the valley, to its slow breath in and out, to death in the land, to stone, to salt, to the sail putting out at dawn, to New Haven, to Seaford, to the scintillating stillness of the sea, to the offer that never ends, to the answers that are held as you make them. I will now read three short, untitled ones. The first of these appeared in the magazine that comes out of Lewes, edited by Anthony Barnett. It's called Snow Lit Rev. So these are the three. There, our lives gleaming, glistening in the setting sun, glinting with all we have left behind. Next. The swell of traffic and the bird fills every rut of life. It rises and flows, and when you open your eyes, you'll realize this world has been trying to make you love it all your beautiful life. And I'll end with a five-liner. The word is dialogic, though you speak alone. And finally, after years of trying, I'm getting one in of my own. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that very varied selection, and also great to have a foretaste of forthcoming Sovietica. Curious thought at an online event like this that you're probably only a few hundred yards away from me as you delivered that reading, but hey, yeah, I'm sure you're more geographically proximate than anybody else here this afternoon. Thanks again. Right, our third reader is Robert Hamberger. Rob lives in Brighton, graduated from Sussex in 1978. He's the author of several volumes of poetry. Blue Wallpaper was shortlisted for the Polari Prize in 2020, and his poetic memoir, A Length of Road, is published later this month. Rob, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks to the Festival of Ideas for this lovely reading with these other excellent poets. I'm going to start with the poem that was chosen to be in Poetry Southeast. I'm a great lover of sonnets, and virtually all the poems I'll read today are sonnets, and this is one of them. It's called Sleeping with Uncertainty. You sleep with uncertainty, that familiar companion, never guessing when he'll go. You doze on tenterhooks. Your pillows know his coming or going is the breath of a liar who'll promise mud is cloud and water's fire. If he mentions surgery and chemo, they're possibilities he must point out, though your biopsy will speak the body's answer. Meanwhile, his avalanche hangs above your head. You can get through weeks this way, rearranging spoons or those jars you love, so sun strikes them on your chilliest day. Home again, after good news, you move to open windows, grateful for grass, for sky. I'm going to read another recent sonnet that was published a few months ago in The Spectator. Our grandchildren live in Bristol, 160 miles from us, and this poem is partly about the need to develop a relationship with small children when you only see them once a month or so. It's called Anything in the World for Ithamar, and it starts with a quotation from the painter Winifred Nicholson in a letter to EJ, 1925. The epigraph is, I don't want anything in the world. I just like existing every minute and watching things coming and things going. Each minute dives too deeply to forsake. Take the sea, for example, this morning. Its blue-grey rise from dip to whitened break. How can I explain it? Take the meaning of your face when I turn up every month to play. Who is this man? We've got a tractor to pile with bananas, the grinning mouth of that pull-along crocodile, your tiger to stroke. And with each toy, I get to know you a little more until the minutes become a few hours. It's time to go. Your weariness means this strange man lifts you in his arms before he disappears, coming and going like waves, minutes, years. And this one isn't a sonnet, and it's from Blue Wallpaper, the collection that Jeremy mentioned, which I was fortunate enough to have shortlisted for the Polari Prize last year. This one, we moved 3 times in 2 years when we moved to Brighton, which was now 10 years ago. And it's a poem that looks at how we unpack our books, really, and what that means. And it also gives a tribute, I think, to my poetry heroes and heroines. It's called Unpacking the Books. They're in alphabetical order. What better democracy? A bird song of Clares, rainbow of doties, sextet of guns. Paper companions establish me through unfamiliar rooms. I wedge my handful of pamphlets, my own narrow volumes, between Hacker and Hamilton. My name tiptoes down 3 spines. Will I fit here, picked from a shelf, skimmed or discarded? I've been told there's no competition, but hardly believe it. A swarm of plaths, the searchlights of rich, voices from a sharper conversation I step into and aim to translate. Who spells another language I'm greedy to hear? Drunk on someone else's lines, I forget my new address, open books to discover my absence, speak a phrase for burnished pages, a word that means alone. And I'll just read 3 from this new memoir, which comes out on the 24th of June from John Murray. So I'm very excited about it. I feel very proud of it. It in fact took 25 years to finish on and off. And it's a genre fluid piece. Basically in 1841, John Clare, the poet, walked home from an asylum in Epping Forest to his home near Peterborough, 85 miles over 4 days. And in 1995, I retraced that walk, sleeping rough as Claire did for 3 days. So it's about that experience, but also weaving through the 4 days of my walk. I wrote 28 poems, which are in the voices of Claire and some people who he met on his walk. Claire wrote a wonderful journal of his walk, and if you haven't read it, it's called Journey Out of Essex. I'd really recommend it. It's only 5 pages or so, but it's a wonderful document. And most of the poems in the sequence start with an epigraph from Claire's journal. And as I said, these ones that I'm going to read today, they're all based on plants. I tried to look very closely at 3 plants that were part of Claire's walk and part of my walk. This first one is called Clover, and it starts with Claire's epigraph. To my good luck, I found some trusses of clover piled up about 6 or more feet square, which I gladly mounted and slept on. My luck's in, napping on 4-leaf clover when it could have been stones. I pluck one out, doss down to count 3 leaves over and over, count sheep till I'm dozy while they chew fat from the land, each white or purple spider flower torn between teeth. Feed me meadow dreams tonight, simple as that green scratch, fainter than each clover heart it arches through, slight as this crescent at the base of my thumbnail when I pinch its stem. Years ago, as she lifted her skirts, Mary or Patty, Betty or Nell, I'd root through to what I wanted. She shifted her shoulders to squash the clover flat, while goosegrass and my bristles tickled her throat. And this penultimate one is called Dead Nettle. As most of you probably know, dead nettle is the one with flowers that doesn't sting you. Dead nettle. Dead because she hides no sting. I slink fingers through the stalks of this green sister, leaving the live ones to better men. My tongue can lick these furry teeth, No blister cuts my kissing lips. A ruff of petals, pearl drops round her neck. These are the leaves I need now, easy to stroke. Dead nettles tickle my touch. I'm sick of old loves, burning if I hold too tight. More fool me to think I had a right to keep her. She'll seed where she wants, reach her full height without my grab or sickle. I look closer at her map of veins. 4 jagged sunshades shield a ring of creamy buds. And the last one I'll read today is called Herb Robert. I suppose it's a flower that means a lot to me. So, Herb Robert. What flavour of man is this, whose tips unpeel into flowers? His arrows blossom. 5 petals top each bloodline that dips and lifts through the breeze. I've seen him hide by the creaky bridge, where lattice water dabbles a trout's tail while bubbles rise. His leaves mimic ferns, his colour campion. How can he be less than he is? He lives his name. 2 bulbs branch from every stem until I catch him taking over the woodside. 100 buds swarm their messages on the air. If I eat his breath, will it heal me? Stroke him across my temples, quietly, quietly. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thanks for that great reading, and really nice to hear how the story of A Length of Road, and look forward to its publication very shortly.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Okay, our next reader is Sarah Barnsley. Sarah lives in Hove and is a senior lecturer in English and American literature at Goldsmiths. She's the author of The Fire Station and co-editor of the Telltale Press Truths anthology. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. I'm also going to open with my poem from the anthology. It's kind of like a compass poem, a map, I suppose, to my selection. And the poem's called The Outsider. But like other poems that I'll read today, it's really concerned with the inside, the outsider. I live in a hide, brain on the binocular hook, lungs on the fold down latch, nerves on a ledge. I see in slats, planks grained with people, dizzying parallelograms of traffic, belt straps of departing light. No one knows I'm here, but I have my breath to blow cool glass scrolls, maps for living in the mist. That's quite a hopeful one for me. It's kind of all downhill from here, or you can be the judge of that, but I just thought I'd put that disclaimer in now. But I'm really drawn to the kind of symbolism, I suppose, of the hide, the bird hide, as it were, of kind of being out in the world, but no one really having any idea of kind of what's going on inside that hide, unless they're in there, and so on. So I'm going to read some outsider poems, and I have another outsider here. It features a horse, and it's called This Horse. There's this horse that can't eat apples. It's not that the horse doesn't like apples, or that its castle of teeth can't crush them. or that its leather satchel tongue can't collect the bits, or that its upturned welly of a throat can't tramp down the chunks. It's that one day, as it drew up an apple of no distinction, the horse had a thought. What if I choke on this? And the more the horse tried to swat the thought away, the more the apple grew, and the more the thought grew, until the horse felt it had Jupiter and all its moons in its mouth, and it couldn't breathe, and it was gagging, and its owner tried to reason with it, but the horse wouldn't be told. And over the course of a year, the horse visited the vet every Wednesday at 12, and the vet advised the horse to try an exercise where the horse had to choose a small globe from a bagged assortment and hold each one in its mouth in a series of graded steps. A robin's egg for 1 minute, a beetroot for 2, a cannonball for 3. And the horse had to commit to the process and tolerate the discomfort, and by all means note down its thoughts and feelings, but not respond to them. And none of this worked. And the only thing for the horse to do was to eat oats and practice radical acceptance of apples as something eaten by other horses in another place and time, as if all the apples in the world were locked behind glass cabinets in a museum, with all the other things the horse's thoughts had forced it to give up: cool pools, hugs of mud, low-hedged fields. The poems that I'm reading are from a kind of larger sequence that I've written about unwanted, intrusive thoughts and the attempts to get relief from them. And the next poem that I'm going to read in this vein has a kind of local feel to it. It's a Sussex poem. It features Virginia Woolf, famous local resident, and it's about something that actually did happen to me and my family on the A27, which, for those who are not familiar with the roadways of Sussex, is a big road that bisects literally the county and runs right past the University of Sussex. But for creative purposes, in this poem, the A27 is transformed into the A23, but think A27. And the other little detail I need to kind of spotlight here is, as Jeremy said, I teach literature, and people kind of get me literary related presents, as you know, as I would want, but sometimes they're quite comical. And one person once bought me a kind of fun set of these little literary figurines. So I've got on my shelf at work this kind of little James Joyce, and there's a Mark Twain and a Shakespeare and a Virginia Woolf. So this poem is inspired partly by that, and it's called Virginia Woolf Has Fallen Over. Virginia Woolf has fallen over, and this means someone will complain about me. The car that sped past us on the A23 at 10 a.m. last Sunday in clear conditions, skidded 90 degrees, recovered it and carried on, will speed past us again, and this time we won't be so lucky. The red nail varnish on the train table where I put my laptop this morning was not red nail varnish, it was contaminated blood. My throwaway comments in a cafe have been recorded. I have an undiagnosed heart condition. I've ingested dried superglue left on scissors used to cut open a finger of UHT milk, subsequently poured into an unwanted coffee, which for the sake of good working relationships, I was compelled to accept. And while I've now stood Virginia Woolf back on the shelf, I can't remember which book she was originally in front of. And this means someone will make a complaint about my throwaway comments in a cafe. My heart will give way from the sight of a car skidding. We will skid, some of us will die, and it will be because my lungs are super glued together. One of us will need a blood transfusion, but it will go wrong because they will use red nail varnish. And I'm stood in front of Virginia Woolf, staring, wondering, what would happen if I turned her 90 degrees to the right, painted her nails, superglued her feet to the MDF? Would everything be okay? Would she complain? I'm going to come to my penultimate poem here, and this poem brings the outsider inside, and it's called Today You Went to Lunch with a Cave. It wasn't the first time, so your eyes didn't widen when it arrived, trying the door first frontwards, then side on, like an overgrown shore crab. The waiter took its shabby medieval cart as the cave sloped into its seat, spreading its grey slabs around like dusty skirts. The table next to you stared deep into the cave's mouth. It performed a polite smile of rock and lichen, debris breaking at the corners like torn bread. You asked the cave how it was, talked about the weather, what a nightmare the bus was, but there was no echo, and you wondered if you'd got the right cave. You lobbed in more words, some sharp as flint, others smooth as shale, and you heard in the distance, contact with water, the sound of weighted objects plummeting, and you knew that this was your cave all right, the cave you drifted into one spring day on a Cornish beach and buried secrets in disturbed sands. The cave which, over the years, gave you shelter, adventure, whose fissures grew like cracking ice, whose darkness was washed darker by restless tides, until there were overcast days like these, where the cave came to you, and you couldn't tell whether it was finally still, or just a wave away from collapse. And while we've had this theme of falling over and collapsing, I'm going to end on a quite extreme poem in this vein of the outside in and so on and so forth. It's a poem which takes its title from a headline that appeared on the BBC website, the news website, I think it was January 2018, and it's called Body Found in Garden After Confession. How the body got there, or whose it was, nobody knew, not even the confessor, who had been resident all their life in Brazil, who was on holiday in the Bahamas at the time experts suggest that the body entered the earth, who was on life support after a diving accident at the point experts say that the body's owner died. And we're pleased to bring this case to its conclusion, said the chief superintendent. And the nation can feel safe again, said the Prime Minister. And we pray for all the families, said the Archbishop of Canterbury. And the confessor said goodbye to the house, the dog, took off their shoes, clothes, and wedding band, went out into the garden, and lay as still as a forgotten rake in tall grass. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. I love the idea of a poem that accommodates the A23 or A27 and Virginia Woolf. I mean, I think it might be unique. Our next reader is Karen Smith. Karen is from Uckfield. She's a librarian. She's a wild swimming addict and poet, and her pamphlet Schist was published in 2019 as part of the Laureate's Choice series. She's currently working on a hybrid text about water. Karen.
Hi, it's really lovely to be here at the first Sussex Festival of Ideas. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for asking me to read. It's a great honour to be here with all of you tonight. Yes, I'm a librarian, I confess. And at the moment I work for the National Poetry Library, and we have a fireman switch in the library, but it doesn't turn off all the power. It actually, when we turn it on in the morning, it lights up William Carlos Williams' famous phrase, "No ideas but in things." And so this is a really lovely reminder for us in the library. It appears above the issue desk of how things are important in poetry. And sometimes, you know, we can access a lot through objects. So the first poem I'm going to read from my book is actually connected with Sussex. My aunt is a really big fan of researching family history, and she's gone back to the 1500s, and she discovered that one of our ancestors was the brother of one of the Lewes martyrs, and his name was Richard Woodman, and he was an ironmaster quite close to where I live now. I didn't know that before I moved here. And so, yes, in the 1500s, it was one of the biggest burnings of people in England. So this is my poem to him. Burning the Years. 11 miles and 4 centuries away, you lean over your furnace, temples lit with sweat, as you sink your crucible, casting nails, bells, firebacks and cannon. I wonder why your tongue is so loose in a time of such divide, why you confess to the rector, refuse to pacify Bishop Bonner in the coal house where he tortures you with a kind of iron finery forged by your own hand. When they came for you at church, you fled, your bare souls charred on the cinder path, cooled on the stone steps of the tower, then stood on the lip of the cornice and gave your body to the wind. Oh, 'cause when they turned your flesh to ashes, you were my age, and I hope you were already commended to our God, knew your name would live on in this place, where burning is more remembering now, though beliefs continue to dry until they catch. The obelisk on the hill has the best view in town, and the steps you climbed have been restored now. Come, walk with me in the dark hours. Tell me what we don't share, what we do. So I'm a real fan of concrete poetry, and some people really hate it. I've met poets, I've been to workshops where people say, I can't stand that stuff. But I thought it was really lovely to include a concrete poem, since we're talking about ideas, and with me thinking about ideas and things. And so this is a poem that I wrote when my partner worked at a garden centre, and they had some guest hens one weekend. These hens obviously weren't used to being around lots of people, and one of them laid an egg, and when he got home, he brought it home to me, and he said, close your eyes, hold out your hands. And I looked at this egg, and it was the strangest egg I'd ever seen. It was really strange shape, but it inspired this poem. I'll just show you what it looks like. It's called Lewes. It was a difficult birth. She'd been distracted, dreaming of helter-skelters, 99 ice creams, and the gentle terraces of yesterday. But it was the squawks of the wild geese and the approach of human feet that made her fluff her lines this time, spoiled this feathered Barbara Hepworth's latest masterpiece that lapped like tides around her chalice eye, spun on the Earth's wonky axis, the pissed magnetic fields that got her and Mr. Whippy's love child drunk on the first breaths it drew of the universe. 22 hours of pushing, squeezing, creaming a calcium call, the colour of the skin on cold tea from the warmth of her rump. And all she's got to show for it is this Dutch tear of an egg, ripe for candling, possibly dud, sealed before it settled in its cot, more ellipsis than ellipse, far from eternal, riddled with ridges and edges that didn't figure in the blueprints. Best laid plans and all that. Still, one end's larger than the other, that's what matters. This check may yet become chick, if only we could make without breaking. It's a wonder there's any talk of which came first. Although my ancestor was a Protestant, I discover, I grew up a Catholic, and I want to say subjected, but I was kind of fond of the Mass growing up. And I suppose in a way it drew me towards poetry because of its kind of incantatory quality. And it does make you aware of the power of words, but also this idea of words and belief and how they can kind of dovetail into each other. It wasn't long ago that I woke up with the words of the Mass in my head, even though I'd long since stopped going to church. And I had these words in my head, but I was also thinking about my father, who has passed away. And so it resulted in this poem where I've rewritten the Nicene Creed, which is part of the Catholic Mass. This is my version, and it's called Orthorexic Creed, and orthorexia is a kind of anorexia, where you decide you want to only eat the right foods, whatever the right foods are. Orthorexic Creed. We believed in John, our father, the unsightly, spectre of Crowhamhurst, who always walked lean and unseen. We believed it was right Christ, the only kind of love, eternally forgotten by the Father, no word or song, night after night, tuned out from tuning in, forgotten, not savoured, of one being with the illness, by him all food was weighed. For us kids and our staycation, he came down from Croydon. By the power of the catamaran, we stayed in caravans on the Isle of Wight and were made scarce. For whose sake did his heart waste under the Hitler of diets? He suffered death and was cremated. On the third day he fared the same in accordance with the victuals. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the opposite end our mother. He will pad again down the stairs to make his muesli and his bread, and his Motown music will have no end. We believe in the human spirit, the word, the singer of life, who feeds on the morsels and the crumbs. With the morsels and the crumbs, he is sweet-tongued and supersized. He has broken through the shirt cuffs. We believe in one holy Catholic and bucolic girth. We acknowledge one rhythm for the forgiveness of sin. We look for the resurrection of the fed and the life in the words unsung. Amen. So I'm going to actually finish with the poem from the anthology, which is also dedicated to my dad, and it appears at the end of my collection. It's a very short collection, you know. I say to my friends, you know, it's a pamphlet, and they say it's a book, it's a book. So that's one argument we had. It's 30 pages, it's not really good. But anyway, it's called Calling Pluto. After dark, I call you up just to hear the weather report, that the nights are drawing in now, and how much you paid for your latest pair of trousers. You'll tell me the one about Pluto, the giant pipeline rolling out under the channel on a steel drum. how it kept the tanks fed for our boys on the continent, how the ice cream hut along the bay was really a pump in disguise, like those Ruperts that kept the Führer guessing, and the kamikaze who blaze unswerving to the end, the enemy you couldn't help but admire. And I'll sing you American Pie again, like that last night in the hospital, however many times you try to die. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. I love that line about Mr. Whippy's love child more every time I hear it. I think you could perhaps write a whole sequence about Mr. Whippy's love child, but thank you very much indeed. Our final reader this evening is Susan Wicks. Susan and I first met on an Arvon Foundation course several decades ago, since when she's published 8 collections of poetry, 3 novels, a memoir, a collection of short fiction, and 2 volumes of translations from the French of Valérie Rousseau. Her most recent collection of poetry is Dear Crane, which Blood Axe published in February. And Susan's latest achievement is a Chumley Award from the Society of Authors, which she received 3 days ago. So warmest congratulations on that, Susan. And over to you.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for asking me, Jeremy, and it's lovely to hear the poems too. I've really enjoyed the readings. So I'm planning to start with the poem from the anthology and then read probably about 5 poems from my collection. This is the poem from the anthology. This is about an elderly man who used to run in Tunbridge Wells, but I haven't seen him for a few years. And I think, to be honest, my husband and I have probably taken his place. And this poem is almost a statement of intent, really, but it's disguised somewhat. So it's called Runner. You'd hardly call it running, yet he runs low to the ground, a sort of fluent hobble in the shallow valley of the gutter, trusting the cars and buses to see him and steer round him, while his feet push gently against the tarmac over and over, and the earth shoves back, as if to say, I'm here, still running, look, and you will never beat me, bone and ligaments and cartilage at ankle, hip and knee, crunching to hard, hot lumps, and in his legs, an ache, pulsing like veins from heels to lower back, as if he knows all that and more, as if he's run for miles already, days or weeks or years, in every kind of weather, unfazed by the downs and ups, the roads and red brick paths, the way the rain has soaked his singlet to a new transparent skin, the way the winter sun closes his weeping eyes, or frost surrounds him with a cloud of breath, the way he looks for turning bikes and dawdling kids with bags and knuckled roots, how after a few weeks he hardly feels his body, those familiar knots of flesh and blood, but only the cold scatter from his water bottle as he raises it and glugs, the way it falls back lighter. So I'm going to read a few poems from the new collection, Dear Crane. I think it was published in May. It was supposed to be published in February, but it wasn't. So it was somewhat delayed. And I've realized that quite a few of the poems in here are about perception and also about the errors of perception, seeing things and getting it wrong, and that it can be unreliable. And it's also about when a tower crane comes and sets itself up very near to your house, and how that kind of transforms your feeling of yourself and your life and what it's worth and virtually everything you're doing. So there's a kind of invisible dialogue going on there, I hope, between the trivial things in my life and this great looming presence at my window. Anyway, this is one about the unreliable perception. And it will mean more if you're about my age, because you'll remember those collecting boxes that they used to have outside shops that were like statues of dogs. Do you remember? Does anybody remember saying "for the blind" on them? So it's called "For the Blind." At the co-op door, a dog sits on his haunches, motionless, in black and white, his knotted leash looped to an iron hook, each hair combed stiff and hard, his belly full of tarnished sixpences. Then he moves his head, rattles his collar's clip. It's dusk, the nursery across the street, a spill of light. At the wattle gate, the mothers wrestle with their buggies, smaller faces gazing upwards, half asleep, to see the glints of eyes, a street lamp as it turns above their heads, a leaf that separates its darkness from the trees. They would have known the dog was real and never begging for an antiquated coin. Now, one by one, each street I take goes dark. I walk alone, watching a patch of white that stops to sniff under the parked cars, then patters almost silently across to sniff again and runs and runs. There's a lot of heavy machinery, I'm afraid, in this collection. Not just cranes, but tractors and cherry pickers and all sorts of things like that. This one's about a crane, and it's called Look. And I'm with my my grandson, who's now 7, and he was 3 then, I think. He is so high up, higher than tree or birds, above the barriers and temporary roads and porter cabins, and whatever grows under scaffolding and plastic. High over what once was the hospital, its rows of beds, an echo fading in a closed ward. He touches something, swivels, makes his metal beam swing out and hover almost over us. How tiny a man is against clouds and luminous in yellow. Yet he sees you in your buggy, sees me kneel, and lifts his hand to wave, miraculous. You look away and frown. You've no word yet for crane or driver. You only squirm inside your snowsuit till we reach the church, then run for the yellow digger, sweep off a whole house. I was thinking we all need a holiday, probably. So this is one that harks back to the place we usually go for a holiday. Well, obviously, we haven't been there for 3 years, but it's a Greek island called Phasos. And this is something that took my attention on a beach one evening, a very, very nice place to have an evening drink. It's called Sunset at Kanayo. Pregnant and in your face, in the briefest of bikinis, she was surely 8 months gone, just showing off her body, what it was, what it could do, and what it held, as if to make us reassess our own or shrink, embarrassed, stare at the horizon down into a glass. She lounged on a daybed, stroking her taut globe that gleamed above the man-made marble beach, then stood and tossed her honey-coloured bob and strutted her great self against the waves, and ambled back, a filmy beach wrap floating in the breeze from her slim shoulders, with a shift of weight, a smile. And only then did we see the photographer half crouched among the beanbags, aiming his dark lens into the future. Was it to advertise the bar, the island, or the state itself of motherhood? Whatever magazine it was, it had tomorrow in the title, and behind a screen of flesh, its voiceless subject slept, lulled by the suck of water, the shingles rush. I wasn't going to read this, but I changed my mind hearing the one about the A27. This is the A26, I think. Is that the road that goes north to Tunbridge Wells from Lewes? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. It comes again from something my grandson said to me when he was about 5. He said, we were talking about driving tractors, and he said to somebody else, he said, Nana's not old enough to drive a tractor, which I rather liked. That's me, yeah. So it's called Perhaps. It's not terribly serious. Perhaps in 20 years, or maybe 10, I'll find I'm big enough to reach and strong enough to move the gear stick, turn the giant wheel, and print my U in mud as well as any man here on the ditch bank, trundle back uphill in a reek of diesel, mobbed by rising gulls, and turn and lumber down and turn again until this fallow weed-grown fields become a bolt of corduroy on the horizon and the light is almost gone. I'll drive towards the gate and turn into the lane and head for home and see a car behind me trying to get past and then a waiting line. But I am old enough to trust my outsized treads, my trail of crusted mud. And in my rearview mirror, I can just make out the man who's driving, not in any hurry, taking in the sight of woods and fields, the smell of damp on leaves, the birds, and see him stretch his aching shoulders, turn towards the woman next to him and start to grin and shake his head and laugh and seem to say with heavy irony that surely anyone who dares to drive a tractor on these roads must be the darling of all Sussex. And by then I am. And the last one I'm going to read is another tractor. We haven't been allowed to forget, because of everything that's been going on about between Harry and Meghan and the rest of the royal family, we haven't been allowed to forget their wedding, really, have we? But this was on the day of the royal wedding, which was the 19th of May 2018, and I was staying in this converted barn in Dulverton with my younger daughter, who's also a writer, Bridget, and we were writing together and walking, and on this day we were walking on Exmoor, and this happened, and I liked it, and so I wrote about it. On the day of the royal wedding, 19th of May 2018, walking all morning along sunken paths between banks of bluebells, ragged robin, primroses, we miss our way and stop beside a churchyard, open our blowing map, and with our index fingers trace our route from one field to the next, to where we strike uphill around the corner of a farmhouse into sunlight, past a square of rutted dirt, where someone's parked a tractor, leaving it driverless. And it is praying, hallowed be thy name, give us this day, forgive us. The words rise and float, free of the empty cab, and up between the leaves towards the edge of Exmoor. No one here but us, and this steep green, with ewes and 3-month lambs scattered across a hillside like grey stones, until a man emerges, turns his still warm key in the ignition, and the voice we heard is drowned out by his engine as we walk away. Thank you, that's the end.
Thank you very much indeed for that reading, Susan, which I think gave us a very clear sense of just how richly deserved your Chumley Award is, and congratulations on that once again. That's really fantastic news. That brings us to the end of our readings. B.S. Johnson famously remarked that someone has to keep the records, and I hope that the Poetry South East series, from the first anthology back in 1976, that one, through to its latest incarnation in Poetry South East 2020, this one, has made a useful contribution in recording the literary history of the region. I hope that whoever is privileged to edit Poetry Southeast 2030 will encounter the same pleasurable challenges that I've experienced in whittling down their choices to 52 poems representing the range and richness of the poetic voices in the region. I'd like to thank all the contributors to the anthology, and especially to our readers here this afternoon going on evening. Stephanie Norgate, Caroline Clark, Rob Hamberger, Sarah Barnsley, Karen Smith, and Susan Wicks. I'd also like to thank Jessica Horn and James Burns for their help with the event and the organising committee of the Festival of Ideas. And finally, I would like to thank everyone who has attended and listened attentively this afternoon. If you would like to explore work by the other 46 poets in Poetry Southeast 2020, then do consider buying a copy. It's £7.50. Details are on the Frogmore Press website, as I said before, or if you are local, then you will find copies in Much Ado in Alfriston, Skylark in Lewes. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a good evening and stay safe.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.